I was going to fit this into my last video on the policies, the liberal policies, and how they're destroying our republic, and how these policies are supported by mental health agencies. And it is true. Now, people might not remember the name Nidal Hasan, but they probably will remember the title, the Fort Hood Shooter. And that was this gentleman, Nidal Hasan. And people will say, oh, well, this was a situation that was caused by mental illness. No, this was a situation, or they'll say, this was a situation that was caused by jihadism. No, this was a situation that was caused by horrific levels of hyper-liberalism and the urge to make everything as diverse as possible at any cost ever. Now, when I signed up for the United States Coast Guard, it was very quick that they determined whether or not I was a member of any white supremacist group, or whether I was a member of any communist group, or if I was a communist. They were very, very interested and very, very, they were very nitpicky of whether or not I was the member of a white supremacist group or a communist. They did not want me in the United States Coast Guard or any other military branch or armed forces branch if I was a communist or if I was a white supremacist. That was made very clear. However, what they didn't ask me, all they did was say, were you ever a member of a group that would want to violently overthrow the United States? Of course, I have never been a member of such a group. I am bitterly opposed to such things. I support this country. I love this country. And it's very sad what this country has become due to this diversity at all costs mentality that has been supported by the hyper-liberals that have received the support by the hyper-liberals in the education system, in the higher education system, and in the mental health agencies. Now, you can look at the mental health agencies as the militant wing, as the foot soldiers of the hyper-liberalism of academia. Basically, the mental health workers are the foot soldiers of social change that are going about ferociously implementing, through force of law, the changes that the hyper-liberals in academia want to see done. Okay? So, Hassan was an Army Medical Corps psychiatrist. Okay? Think about that. He was a psychiatrist. He admitted to the shootings at his court-martial in August 2013. A jury panel of 13 officers convicted him of 13 counts of premeditated murder, 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder, and unanimously recommended he be dismissed from the service and sentenced to death. Hassan is incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, awaiting execution. He was born Nidal Malik Hassan, September 8th, 1970. His age is 52. He was born in Arlington County, Virginia. His education was at Virginia Western Community College, Virginia Tech, Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. His occupation was as a psychiatrist. His criminal status is incarcerated. His motive was opposition to military deployment and jihadism. Okay? Now, you might be saying, well, clearly what the problem is here is that he was opposed to the military deployment and he was a jihadist. Well, the question I have is, how the hell did he get in the military? Well, the military, and it's not a question I have, it's a question you should be asking. And this has to do with this diversity at all costs mentality that has taken our society and our republic by the throat and has put it in a stranglehold. This is just from the History Channel, showing that he was found guilty and going over what had happened. Now, I wanted to go over the political abuse of psychiatry in the Soviet Union because political abuse of psychiatry in the Soviet Union was refined to a science of social control and manipulation, and this is exactly what I think is going on in the United States by the radical leftists that are running our country. So, during the leadership of General Secretary Brezhnev, psychiatry was used to disable and remove from society political opponents who openly opposed or openly expressed beliefs that contradicted the official dogma. The term philosophical intoxication, for instance, was widely applied to mental disorders diagnosed when people disagreed with the country's communist leaders. Now, what you have to understand is today you're seeing people called crazy if they disagree with radical feminism, if they disagree with transgenderism, if they disagree with homosexuality, if they believe in God, if they believe in what have you, they're considered crazy, okay? So, communist leaders, by referring to the writings of Marxism, the founding fathers of Marxism, Leninism, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and Vladimir Lenin, made them the target of criticism. Okay, so when they would disagree with these folks, okay? Article 5810 of the Stalin-era Criminal Code anti-Soviet agitation was to a considerable degree preserved in the new 1958 RSFSR Criminal Code as Article 70, Anti-Soviet Agitation and Propaganda. In 1967, a weaker law, Article 109.1, dissemination of fabrications known to be false, which defame the Soviet political and social system, was added to the RSFSR Criminal Code. These laws were frequently applied in conjunction with the system of diagnosis for mental illness developed by academician Andrei Snezvinsky. Together, they established a framework within which non-standard beliefs could easily be defined as a criminal offense. And in this country, we don't even need to define them as a criminal offense. We just need a psychiatrist to say that the person's a little kooky, and then they can disappear. Applying the diagnosis, the anti-Soviet political behavior of some individuals being outspoken in their opposition to the authorities, demonstrating for reform, and writing critical books were defined simultaneously as criminal acts. Symptoms of mental illness. Within the boundaries of the diagnostic category, the symptoms of pessimism, poor social adaptation, and conflict with authorities were themselves sufficient for the formal diagnosis of sluggish schizophrenia. You will notice that the Democratic Party had suggested that white people that have racist views be drugged with blood pressure medication. I talked about this in a previous video that has shown to lessen racial prejudice. So they want to medicate people for their opinions. Psychiatric incarceration of certain individuals was prompted by their attempts to emigrate, to distribute or possess prohibited documents or books, to participate in civil rights protests and demonstrations, and become involved in forbidden religious activities. In accordance with the doctrine of state atheism, the religious beliefs of prisoners, including those of well-educated former atheists who had become adherents of a religious faith, was considered to be a form of mental illness. That will be happening here very soon. It's already gotten to the point where they try to equate religion with mental illness, unless, of course, you're a liberal. The KGB routinely sent dissenters to psychiatrists for diagnosis in order to discredit dissonance as the product of unhealthy minds and to avoid the embarrassment caused by public trials. Highly classified government documents that became available after the dissolution of the Soviet Union confirm that the authorities consciously used psychiatry as a tool to suppress dissidents. You will see that happening in this country very, very soon. It's already happening, but it will become more and more and more visible. People will actually understand that it's happening. But by the time they understand it, they won't be able to do anything about it. Political abuse of psychiatry is the misuse of psychiatric diagnosis, detention, and treatment for the purposes of obstructing the fundamental human rights of certain groups of individuals in a society. Okay, right now, that's being used right now. Do you remember the man that lost his children because he had named his kids, Big H and something Nation, something Brown? Okay? It was a Pennsylvania man that lost his kids. They tried to restrict the rights of people with specific beliefs for zero reason. There was not a clear reason given for that man having the situation he did. It entails the exculpation and committal of citizens to psychiatric facilities based upon political rather than mental health-based criteria. Okay, the thing is, they merge the two, and you're going to see that happening in this country. Many authors, including psychiatrists, also use the terms Soviet political psychiatry. Okay? Now, what you have to remember is the DSM is far more a political text, okay, than it is a medical text. Okay? Far more so. Homosexuality was included and then disincluded from the DSM, not for medical reasons, or not because there was any new evidence, simply for political reasons both times. Punitive psychiatry is used to refer to this phenomenon. Punitive psychiatry is used in this country to try and silence people and bully people into doing what people want. Okay? The criminal justice system should have no right to force people to take medication. Okay, in his book, Punitive Medicine, Alexander Podrobinik defined the term punitive medicine, which is defined with punitive psychiatry as a tool in the struggle against dissidents who cannot be punished by legal means. Okay? So punitive psychiatry is neither a discrete subject nor a psychiatric specialty, but rather it is an emergency arising within. Now, I would say it is a psychiatric specialty. Okay? I think punitive psychiatry is a psychiatric specialty, just like psychiatric warfare is a psychiatric specialty. Okay? So psychiatric confinement of sane people is uniformly considered a particularly pernicious form of repression, and Soviet punitive psychiatry was one of the key weapons of both illegal and legal repression. An inherent capacity for abuse. The diagnosis of mental disease can have the state license to detain persons against their will and insist upon therapy, both in the interest of the detainee and in the broader interests of society. In addition, receiving a psychiatric diagnosis can itself be regarded as oppressive. In a monolithic state, psychiatry can be used to bypass standard legal procedures, it's done here all the time, for establishing guilt or innocence and allow political incarceration without the ordinary odium attaching to such political trials. In the period from the 1960s to 1986, the abuse of psychiatry for political purposes was reported to have been systematic in the Soviet Union and episodic in other Eastern European countries such as Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. The practice of incarceration of political dissidents in mental hospitals in Eastern Europe and the former USSR damaged the credibility of the psychiatric practice. Okay, this is under Stalin and Khrushchev. The Soviet Secret Service took an interest in this area of medicine. In 1948, one of those with overall responsibility for Soviet secret police, pre-war procurator general and state prosecutor, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Vyshinsky, was the first to order the use of psychiatry as a tool of repression. Russian psychiatrist Pyotr Ganushkin believed that in a class society, especially during the most severe class struggle, psychiatry was incapable of not being repressive. A system of political abuse of psychiatry was developed at the end of Joseph Stalin's regime. punitive psychiatry was not simply an inheritance from the Stalin era. However, according to Alexandra Etkin, the Gulag, or Chief Administration of Corrective Labor Camps, was an effective instrument of political repression. System 1 was that, was that of punitive psychiatry. It directly served the authorities and those in power and was headed by the Moscow Institute for Forensic Psychiatry, named in honor of Vladimir Serbsky. System 2 was made up of elite psychotherapeutically oriented clinics. It was headed by Leningrad Psychoneurological Institute, named in memory of Vladimir Beknerev. The hundreds of hospitals in the provinces combined elements of both systems. And if someone was mentally ill, then they were sent to a psychiatric hospital and confined there until they died. If his mental health was uncertain, but he was not constantly unwell, he and his testimonial for employers, the party, and other Soviet institutions were sent to a labor camp or to be shot. When allusions to socialist legality started to be made, it was decided to prosecute such people. This is going to come about in the United States if we don't start to recognize what's going on with places like LenapeValleyFoundation. I'm going to move on here. Political abuse of psychiatry is the purported misuse of psychiatric diagnosis, detention, and treatment for purposes of obstructing the fundamental human rights of certain groups and individuals in society. This is Alexander Gabashev, Russian dissident who was sentenced to compulsory treatment multiple times. There's compulsory treatment in this country. When you are sentenced to take medication or sentenced to a mental institution, that's compulsory treatment, okay? When people are taken and 302'd for no reason, that's compulsory treatment. This goes into the mass trials, etc. Moving on. Now, there was a struggle against psychiatric abuse in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union system, political abuse of psychiatry took place, blah, 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 during leadership of Brezhnev, yada, yada, yada. Okay, Soviet psychiatric abuse was exposed. Okay, Vladimir Bukovsky, a British neuropsychologist, Soviet human rights activist, political prisoner at blah, 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 in Amsterdam, yada, yada, yada. This is him going over what happened. You can read it on your own. Congress in Mexico City. The Congress in Mexico City was held on the 28th of November. The statement of 44 British psychiatrists was circulated to 7,000 delegates in English, Spanish, and French. There were statements from the Soviet Human Rights Committee describing the part played by Sinhinsky, the head of the Soviet delegation in Medvedev case, when speakers demanded that Congress go on record against the confinement of dissidents in psychiatric hospitals. The Soviet delegation instantly walked out. So this is an example of how they just walk out. This is exactly how Bucks County, when I cornered the person from Bucks County, she fell silent. When I cornered the people from Lenape Valley, they fell silent. It's because they don't have the ability to argue, so they just aren't going to argue because they know what they're doing is wrong, but they want to continue doing it. Okay, and these are the Honolulu Congress, etc. This can be read on your own, and that's the end of this video.